So hello and welcome to day 2 of Stareable Fest. I'm Brie Castellini. I will be your tour guide for this evening. And this is how genre opens doors for underrepresented creators with Sonja O'Hara. So Stareable Fest, the place that you are currently, is the premier annual indie TV and web series festival in the US and the new home for digital creative talent in the TV industry. We honor this year's best talent, provide a space for the next generation of creators to connect with industry executives, grow their network, learn new skills, and build community. Look at us building community together this morning. Stareable Fest is presented by Dell Technologies with NVIDIA and Intel, making workstation and monitor solutions purpose-built for creators just like you. Bring your creative ideas to life. Stareable Fest LA is held in partnership with XRM Media Studios, which is, in fact, the incredible venue that we are all in today. So without further ado, Sonja, welcome to the stage.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Good. A round of applause for Sonja. So Sonja, how about you introduce yourself a little bit before we get started?
Absolutely. I am a filmmaker and actor from Nova Scotia, Canada. I grew up in a fishing village out there, and I went to acting school in New York at the New York Conservatory for Dramatic Arts. And then I got frustrated, like everyone else did, with sort of the acting like hustle of, auditioning and booking really subpar kind of roles. And in my mid-20s, I decided to go and write my first narrative feature that I also starred in, and that launched a whole different path within my career than I ever imagined, and got me going as a filmmaker, and it's been sort of an insane ride.
Yeah, well, and we're going to really be talking about that insane ride today. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of going to be a combination of things. It's going to be a combination of, a case study of Sonja's career and everything that she's done, how she went from one project to the other. We're also going to talk about inspiration. And of course, we're going to talk about genre and how genre, despite being something that a lot of people write off as like childish or whatever, actually is a really rich place to build your craft and build your audience and build your career. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to start with some of the things that inspired Sonja in the beginning of her career.
So Virgin Suicides was a huge one for me. I don't know who here has seen it, but it's the one film of the films that we're going to talk about today that does have a female director. And it was interesting when I revisited a lot of the early queer inspiration that I had growing up, because I didn't realize how much was still male-helmed. And these were like the great lesbian stories, and they were still all made by dudes. But this project in particular, I remember when I saw it, God, I'm maybe dating myself, but it was like Blockbuster era, and I went and got lost in this beautiful, strange film. And it's so interesting to me in that it's sort of about the male gaze on these young women in this house that are sort of fetishized by the neighbors. But it's a female director, and she just does it in such an interesting way. And then I went from there and read the book and fell in love with just the entire world. But it's really been inspiring to me in everything I've done, in just the way the blocking and the production design and the staging. I had never seen anything like it.
So when we think about terms like female and male gaze, especially from like a directing perspective, like what differentiates the two in your mind?
Well, as an actor for years, I would act in projects that had male directors who some were deeply gifted and some had a lot of work to do.
Sure, some were male directors.
And at the time, I felt just hypersexualized, and even if what they were asking me to inherently do, it wasn't necessarily problematic, but the way that everything was just set up for titillation felt deeply unnatural. Mm-hmm. And I think for me as a filmmaker, I'm really interested in capturing intimate moments between humans, but I try not to do it in a way that seems silly or gratuitous.
Can you define that for us? There's obviously a lot of nudity in Doomsday, your
Sure,
project that's at Stareable Fest, in an hour. Everybody go see it.
I think that a reviewer said it best about my work, that it is neurotic without being erotic.
Okay.
And I think it's sort of exploring why we connect and how we touch in a way that isn't necessarily about the act of sex and more about why we're connecting and why we're together.
Sure.
So that's interesting to me, sort of just finding a way to do it that feels truthful to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's a great answer. So let's move on to the next piece of inspiration.
Now, if anyone hasn't seen My Summer of Love, this is an absolutely insanely beautiful film. Yes, oh, that makes me happy. Yeah, it was how Emily Blunt got her first break in the UK, and it's this tale of these two young women that meet in the English countryside who have sort of a combative, obsessive friendship, frenemyship that turns into a love affair while dealing with an oppressive older brother who's sort of making everything feel like it's beautifully done. And when I saw this film, and Pawlowski's directing is just transcendent, and I just knew that I wanted to shoot something like this, and visually my show Doomsday gets as much from My Summer of Love as it does from Virgin Suicides, and it's just a beautiful character-driven love story.
Cool, and this came out in, I think, 2004. Mm-hmm. Did you see it when it came out, or a little
Yes,
later?
I think it went to TIFF, and I'm Canadian, so the Toronto Film Festivals are Sundance, and it was one of those films that I saw and was like, holy shit, I need to make movies. Like, it was just one of those things that it just hit me, and I was like, I have to do this.
All right, very cool.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Mulholland Drive. That was, technically came out a little earlier, 2001.
Yes, I think I saw Mulholland Drive later because I think that there was a lot of censorship going on. I'm from a fishing village, it's repressed. And this was the movie that made me realize that I could do genre and that horror wasn't necessarily something that felt so foreign to me. Like David Lynch does something with the love story between these women that draws the fine line between being exploitative and moving and meaningful. But it was one of those things that brought surrealism into my work. And the biggest compliment I got on my newest movie is I cast the actor Shane West, I don't know if you know, from like Walk to Remember days, and he was like, I saw the film and it kind of reminded me of a David Lynch film, and I was like, yes, I have achieved what I was going for. So it's all thanks to sort of Mulholland Drive.
Awesome. And so the next one we're talking about is Carol.
Carol was a beautiful film that had both the making of this character-driven indie film, but also noir. And I love like merging genres. And it was one of those films that I was like, okay, you can do this. It can still be sort of seem prestige, because for a while, unfortunately, a lot of queer cinema was kind of considered campy or tawdry or in like a box that wasn't considered something that was going to be celebrated as mainstream. It was still fray.
And genre was the same way.
Yes. So combining, a beautiful queer love story with genre elements, I don't know, it's something that stuck with me. And the cinematography and the desaturated style, it was just beautiful.
Yeah, and so we've been talking about these like classics or early aughts queer storylines, and I'm curious for you, as you're growing up in this community, as you're learning about yourself and your own sexuality, are there like tropes that you're noticing in these early films that like inform your work later, inform like things you try to avoid?
So I think for a lot of queer cinema, there is the notion there's something bad happens to somebody that we really adore, and there's just the trope of,
kill your gays.
Yes. I mean, it ends always tragically. And the other thing that it's all able-bodied, white, femme-looking depictions, right? Sure. And it became something to me where I wanted to tell queer stories, but not make them like I can shoot it in a gauzy, ethereal way, but I want to have body types and skin colors, and I want to show something a little different than just the narrow lens that we're showing on what a lesbian love story can look like. Totally. So that was really important to me. And then also when you're coming of age and figuring out if your sexuality and whatnot, there were a lot of films that I loved that I would later show friends, like But I'm a Cheerleader is another great one. And I would, when they had weird reactions to it, I'd pretend I liked it less and be like, oh, I guess I didn't maybe really see the ending. And there were like a lot of times that I would deflect after.
Sure.
And I think that's why, it's so important for things to get out in such a huge way.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's too bad because, like, obviously in horror and thrillers, something bad has to happen to the characters. You can't avoid
absolutely,
it.
And that's fine when we get to like slasher flicks and the next film in this, awful things happen to good people.
Speaking of,
but yeah, Black Swan was the one that I saw that I said, okay, if I'm going to, because I was getting a lot of opportunities in horror, and I was really resistant to it, and for me, Black Swan straddles that beautiful line of doing psychological thriller in a way that is like real human stories. Like Aronofsky is dealing with the fragility of the human body, pushing it to its limits, and it's just horrific. And the relationship with the mother and the daughter and Mila Kunis's character within it, I just loved the way that he was able to push the envelope, but it still felt true to, Natalie Portman's character's experience. It didn't feel exploitative in a way that wasn't grounded in character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think when people say like, oh, I love horror movies, like that isn't anything. Like, what do you mean horror movies?
Right, what does that mean? Like, what within it do you connect to, right?
And for you, it was the deep kind of character explorations.
Yes, that was why I wanted to do it. I also, in both Mulholland Drive and this movie, I'm really into the moments in our lives that are humiliating, that we repress for a very, very long time, and then like later seem like a defining thing. And like there's a moment where Natalie Portman's character like wakes up and surrounded by stuffed animals, and her mother is like watching her have like a very sexy dream, and it's just the most like uncomfortable, deeply awful, shame-inducing, fearful moment. And I think moments that explore vulnerability like that are why I want to be an artist, right?
Totally. And then, of course, with horror, you get to do like the kind of surrealist, fun stuff. And
yes.
You get to be a little more heightened.
Yes, you get to make art films, and that's what I always knew I wanted to do.
Cool. Well, then let's start actually talking about the work that you have made. So this is Sonja's work.
So my first feature ovum I made when I was 25 years old. I did something, we all talk about like the Robert Rodriguez's of the world who, sold blood and plasma and whatnot to fund the project. I sold my eggs to make this movie. Mm-hmm. And it was a wild ride. And I started to write about the process of designer eggs in New York City and how they harvested them from young women and how it was sort of a eugenics-y dark circle of, and I just wrote about the exploitation of eggs.
So did the egg selling come before the script or after?
I saw an ad in Backstage when it was still like a physical magazine a long time ago when I was like in acting school, and I thought to myself, if there is a way to tell a story about a girl who does this but then backs out of it. So I went like undercover and started to go through the process of pretending I wanted to sell my eggs to gather intel.
Sure.
And then they're like, you can make a lot of money. And then I was like, oh, what if I fund my movie about this and get real meta? And that was how I ended up doing it. And then that sold to Tribeca and ended up being my first thing that was put on a streaming platform. And it's a funny one because we all are filmmakers who are making things that you have this idea if you submit to festivals. Your first project, we all hope will get into like the Sundances of the world. But I can tell you that if you're, like my project went to some very cool festivals, but I didn't get into the top elite fests. And we all know of like the filmmakers who break in with their first thing. But it in no way stops the traction that you can get with your career. Like I was able to achieve all the things eventually that my peers who got into Sundance and fizzled out initially. Like there's, the whole marathon thing versus sprinting. Like I felt like I was able to get there without it happening immediately. And if anything, it made me way more hell-bent to keep doing it.
Totally, yeah. I mean, great opportunities are great opportunities, but ultimately, if you want it bad enough, you'll figure out something else. Mm-hmm. Sundance is not the only way that people get successful. So what were some things about like making this first feature? Because like a feature as your first major project.
Yes, I had never made a short. I was rather insane when I jumped into making a feature. I had been in a theater collective in New York City that I just fell in love with the other artists I was working with. We were doing everything together, and it was just this beautiful group of humans, and I started to write for them. And I think when you're writing for actual actors in mind, I felt like so much of the dialogue just wrote itself, right? So it was, and I was just doing like really like grassroots things of, besides the egg selling, I was, there was a girl who had a family restaurant and we're shooting there, and somebody else was like, my dentist is pretty chill, and I was like, oh, what if we make the dentist office the egg clinic? And it was just, you get creative and you work on a micro budget, and I made the feature for $25,000 and it made its money back, which is for a first feature is hard to do.
Yeah, 3% of features make their money back.
And that gave me the track record to be able to make other things. So I think sometimes you want to make that first feature for a few $1 million, but you're putting yourself in a really challenging situation to recoup. And sometimes having like more modest goals for it It was like each thing had a bigger budget and got more traction, and that led to further and bigger opportunities because I could prove to investors that it wasn't just a vanity project where I had no game plan.
Totally. Yeah. And so for this project, did you act in it and write it?
Yeah, I starred in it and I wrote it and produced it. And for that one, I think for many of us, we don't necessarily, I didn't as a woman ever see versions of myself as a director on screen. And it wasn't until I made this feature, hired a very capable male director, and watched him stand beside the monitor the whole time and work with my DP as I was out there working with the actors, and I was blocking, and I was rehearsing, and I was working with casting directors. I realized in the 25 days it took to make this movie that I was a director, and for the next movie, I never needed to hire someone again. But I learned by doing, and I learned from being a child actor who was getting terrible direction on set from many well-meaning directors that didn't care about performance.
Yeah.
You just get better about, you just learn what works and what doesn't, and that became a lot of my film school.
Yeah, and I always say that if you want to be a director, be an actor first.
Completely, yeah.
You completely understand like the vulnerability it takes,
Yes.
how isolating it sometimes
Yes.
feels,
Yeah.
and what you would like to hear at the end of a difficult take.
For sure, yes.
So from Ovum came Anatomy of an Orchid.
Yeah, I made this short film that was something that I wanted to explore gender norms, and I wanted to have a more diverse cast than I had done before, and I opened the casting call for this one particular role up to, I just was completely open, and I found an incredible non-binary Asian performer who blew my mind and now has a Netflix deal, and they were just insanely good, and I was like, it has to be this person, you know?
So why did you go from feature to short?
I just wanted to try out something that I didn't have to work on for years, because with the feature, I mean, my God, even like I was hell-bent on doing it and I did it, but you know, I premiered on the festival circuit in 2015. I think it was still on a year later. Then it takes, you know, I was shopping for distribution. We get this sales agent distributor. It takes like another year and a half for them to drop it. And it's like years to see your baby happen. And I wanted to make art right then, immediately.
Sure.
And I went and made this short. And it was my first project to get into an Oscar qualifying Holly Shorts Festival.
Sure.
And that gave me a little more legitimacy. And throughout all of this period, they say not to write cold emails, and I have never listened to that. And I would target the people that represented creators that were like me, that were really specific. Like I knew I wasn't gonna work for Disney. I was the A24 girl from day one. And I wrote a cold email to A24 and harassed them until they agreed to meet with me. And I did that with HBO, and I did that with Lionsgate. And years later, I'm working with these companies. But at that point, I was the annoying girl that was like writing to them, but I wasn't making asks in these emails. I was just saying like, hey, just wanted to let you know the micro budget short I did got into an Oscar qualifying festival. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that the feature I wrote got to the second round at Austin Film Fest. It was sort of like painting the portrait of somebody that was getting traction that would be a good client, and I wasn't asking them to read a giant 120-page script, right?
Sure.
Like everything was like small micro steps.
So you were almost treating them like you already had a relationship. You were just like, hey, just checking in. I'm doing well.
Yeah, it'd be like, since we talked last, and they're like, I didn't respond to you. And then eventually they did.
Did you have representation at this time?
At that point, I had gotten a manager, and I had done what I had thought everything right. And yet the manager, and this is one of those annoying stories, one of the actors from one of my projects went to LA, was in a bar, and a dude hit on her. And she said like, hey, what do you do? And he said he was a manager. And she's like, I have a friend and he said he specifically wanted female filmmakers. And she made him watch a trailer of one of my projects in the bar and wouldn't let him go until he watched it, and he signed me.
Oh, wow.
And then he was at a smaller company, and then he moved up to Management 360. But that took 5 years of being repped,
Sure.
where he didn't have the pull, and then suddenly he did.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's a good story. And like if any of you were at the showrunner conversation last night, there was obviously the conversation about Ellen Rappaport's like feature got her representation because like a friend of hers was reading it in bed and her husband's a studio exec. And like there was a questioner last night who was like, I don't have friends like that. But I think that the lesson is not, make the right friends.
No.
I think the lesson is make friends.
Yes, and be genuinely excited about other people's work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would go and see a play in New York every single night. Like, I was obsessed, and I met people because I was excited about what they were doing, and they were excited about me.
Yeah.
And I think those genuine connections, half of those people became creative execs at businesses, but at the time, they would have said they were going to act until they died, right? So you just are on this journey together, and it should be symbiotic, and I cast people, and then later they cast me or whatever, but it's not ever, it doesn't feel strategic because that feels gross.
Exactly. And it
Right.
shouldn't feel gross. If it feels
No.
gross, you're doing something
Then you're
wrong.
definitely doing something wrong, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that there's also something to be said about like making good impressions, because it's not that either of us have like a lack of talented people that we know.
No, everyone I know, like, they're talented people that have MFAs that have worked their asses off. But I think a lot of people are making great work and not showing it. They're hiding in their basement with their work.
They're not supporting other people's work. They walk into their screening
All
and
the
walk out
time.
as soon as
Yes,
it's done.
yes, every time.
Yep.
And like, I was making a project, trying to get an exec to watch a project, even a 10-minute short, they're not going to do it. So I started getting creative and made trailers for everything I was doing, convinced trailer editors to make something very short that was a minute long. And I would send those trailers, and that's what was getting people to look at my stuff.
Okay.
I met with CAA, and the agent told me he watched 1 minute of my trailer, and that was what it took for him to give me the meeting. He said no one watches more than a minute of anything, which is very concerning, but also, it makes you realize you gotta like have those trailers, and you gotta have sizzles that people can see.
Yep.
And yeah.
And be a good person, because it's not enough to be talented and there. You also
Yes.
have to be the kind of person somebody wants to whip out their phone in a bar and say, hey, watch my friend's
Yes,
trailer,
yes,
Like,
completely.
you're not going to
Yeah.
do that for everyone. So
No.
relationships that are genuine.
And I have cast that actress in everything I've done since, not because she did that, but I was already obsessed with her work before then, and we've been supporting each other for a long time, and that was the kindest, coolest thing a person could do.
It's amazing. So for this project, you directed this?
Yes, I directed this and acted in a supporting role and wrote this, and it was the thing that, like, everything I kind of remember, both the creative process, and we're very lucky to get to do that. It's like a blur, and it's very exciting. And then I think, how did this advance my career? Like, I hate to be that person, but at the same time, you constantly have to think how to leverage a career thing. And this was the thing that got me. People watched it. It was short enough. I had been sending them trailers. This was, I think, the first thing they actually watched at a high level. And yeah.
That's amazing. So I did want to ask you a question
Yes.
about directing and acting. So obviously you have a lot of experience acting.
Yes.
This is your first time. How do you balance those two roles?
I believe that I don't micromanage. I have to trust the people that I'm working with. I do a lot of rehearsal beforehand if I'm acting in something. And when I'm on set, I trust my DP. We've shot listed everything. We know exactly what we're trying to achieve. And I have to feel safe in their hands. I think that if I'm hovering over a monitor the whole time and micromanaging, I think I get in my head and it doesn't feel like an organic performance.
Got it. So a lot of your directing kind of happens before you get to set.
It does. And then I'm working with the other person, but when I'm in a scene with somebody else, I like to have given direction beforehand, because otherwise it feels like this unfair imbalance of power.
Sure. Yeah,
So-
that's always the awkwardness of just like trying to have both roles appear and
Yes.
in charge.
And I've paid acting coaches to come for the day on days that I've had vital scenes. Like, I think that your film won't work with you in the main role if that performance isn't solid, and you need to nurture it and do everything you can to make that great and not have an ego about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so let's move on
Yeah.
to Doomsday, which is streaming at Stareable Fest in half an hour.
So Doomsday was the thing that changed my entire life. It went from being a no-budget project to getting an Emmy nomination. And it was this very weird thing of, I was all set to do another writer's script. I had booked a crew and shoot dates. That writer signed with ICM, and suddenly her agents wanted money for something that we were going to be doing for very little. And I had another project, and I said, what if we pivoted and did this project that I wrote? And strange things happened. Like in my writing class, a very kind lady said, I have a place in the Catskills. Would you like to shoot there? And I was like, what? And it was people just really kindly offered favors. And I cast a bunch of the same actors from Ovum. And it's interesting because one of the actresses, Alice Kremmelberg, is now the lead on the show The Sinner of the new season. Donald Paul ended up getting a series regular in Queen of the South. Mark St. Cyr is a Disney star on High School Musical. And these were all just actors I met in New York that I believed were so talented that hadn't had breaks yet. And now seeing them soar is the best thing that you can ever ask for.
Wow, that's amazing. And so Doomsday is a limited series,
Yes,
is how you
I
describe
made
it?
an hour-long pilot for the show and submitted it to TV festivals. And I feel like TV and web fest are a bit more of a meritocracy than film festivals because people don't have giant budgets to largely. Sometimes we see pilots that are made that you're like, okay, well, that's clearly made by X giant brand.
Sure.
But usually people have micro budgets. They're largely shooting in their apartment. And I found that the festivals that if you get in with your short film, the prize is getting in, right? You're like,
Yeah.
I get a laurel.
Exactly.
But if you get in with your web pilot, a lot of places like this festival offer meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I started gathering who I was meeting and tracking them as an executive from one company to another. And it became expanding sort of my Rolodex of connections. And when I finally was at the point to meet agents, I gave a list of everyone I'd met in the last 5 years at every festival. And they were like, holy shit, like you know everyone. And I only did from festivals. Like I had no insider, I'm not from any sort of money or privilege. Like I'm from a family of teachers and no one has ever even lived in America. So I didn't have any of that here. And it was sort of finding a weird way in. And my skill was harassing people to get indoors.
So what festivals had you been to with this?
I did Series Fest and New York Television Festival and obviously Stareable and Brooklyn Web Fest and every web festival that there was, this show went to. And I was strategic. I had an hour-long pilot. A lot of places won't do the whole hour.
Yeah.
So I did a half hour and then I had an 8-minute. And I was just like doing all of the versions everywhere I could. And during that process, I got a deal for the show. But at that point, I didn't yet have an entertainment lawyer. One of the creators in my show was disagreeing on how the show would move forward because when you make something, you all have the best intentions. Everyone feels like they're an EP and ownership on your micro budget thing. But when real money comes on board, if you don't have those
Contracts
in place, it can implode.
Did you have contracts?
We did not. We were friends who had
That's
made
another lesson.
projects in Brooklyn,
Yep.
and we didn't. And suddenly there was real money on the table, and I wasn't able to sell the show.
Oh, no.
And I was like, okay, what do I do? So I wrote something else very quickly, used the skills that I had from Doomsday, and was able to sell that and get a digital deal.
Okay.
However, that digital platform, it was when all the studios had their own little digital,
IFC Comedy Crib.
yeah, they all had them.
CISO, that kind of stuff.
And the show sold. I felt like my life was moving forward. I was getting attached to write, direct, and act in a series. And then that digital company folded. So then you're like, okay, back to the drawing board.
Sure.
And then I went back to Doomsday. And I decided to make an episode, just a short form 15-minute episode during quarantine when the bigger projects were all pushed away. And that was the project that ended up, we submitted it to the Daytime Emmys, got the nomination, and then suddenly all the streamers were interested again. And now it's going to be coming out on Shudder.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. But it was such a long journey, and I had
Sure.
thought the project was dead.
Did you manage to get around the contract disputes?
I ended up doing a trade with that creator, and I was like, we'd written another show together, and I was like, this will be your show, and I will get this. And it was like a peaceful,
Okay.
and it all worked out for everyone.
Good. That's good. But yeah, sign contracts
Now,
even if you're
contracts,
friends.
dear God, contracts.
Yeah, I've heard way too many stories from
Yeah.
web series creators, especially because web series is a much longer commitment usually, and it's coming out for longer, and there's a lot of opportunities. And I've seen so many web series creators who like start with friends, start with best
Yes.
intentions, and then as soon as things get real, all of a sudden somebody goes goofy, and
Yeah.
you need to have something to fall back on.
And like when you're making a movie, you can put that money in, and then later there's a point system that works when you're selling it.
Yeah.
Nothing works like that with TV.
No.
And they really only want the writer-creator. And at that time, I was throwing around the term creator as a version of co-director.
Sure.
The Writers Guild will do arbitration for that. Like, you can't, these titles have real meanings, and I didn't know it. I was an artist making art,
Right.
and you become a business person while you are selling your show.
Totally. So tell me a little bit about the Emmy submission process.
It's an interesting one because there were many different short form categories. We submitted it under the daytime drama. It was like limited series or something like that.
Okay.
And my poor editor, who co-directed the most recent episode and will be at the talkback for the screening after this, Micah Stewart, is amazing. And he was so patient and was willing to cut all of the different versions that the Emmys needed, because you needed to do little nomination videos for everyone. I was submitting actors, I was submitting production design, like
Sure.
you're doing anything to get that nomination. And then when we broke through and got a nomination for Best Series, that was wonderful, but very unexpected. But your teamwork.
Is there
Yeah.
anything that you had to be like eligible for? Like, you mentioned the Oscar qualifying.
You have to have made an X amount of episodes that year.
Got it. Okay.
So all of my old episodes of Doomsday with real production value done years before the pandemic were ineligible. But the loophole is you can do a sizzle trailer of what just happened on your show. And I was able to put together a snazzy 1 minute that showed everything that I had done before and that still influences judges.
Sure.
Right? So that I would recommend if you're submitting, definitely do what just happened because that is your sizzle.
Got it.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've gotten through several projects of yours
Yes.
now, and obviously the theme of this conversation is how genre opens doors.
Yes.
So I know we talked when we were kind of putting this together about like the theoretical limitations that working in largely genre work can give you. So like, how have you found that? Do you feel limited?
It's interesting because I never aspired to be a horror director, right? Like that absolutely did not feel like something that could have been a likely fit. However, I will say that the umbrella of horror is so vast and significant that I was making psychological thriller and dramas. I didn't call them such, but I was doing that. And people are really receptive to give young creators of color, queer, women, opportunities where you might not be able to in the traditional studio system. And I started from these festivals getting offers to direct other people's things. And at first it seemed very weird. And then I just sort of decided to say yes and try it out and realized that I loved it and that I was really getting to hire all the talented people that I had met in every other arena and put them under an umbrella with a project with real money, reward them for working when they were working for me on a micro budget. And I was getting to also level up and work with actors that I couldn't have previously afforded before because horror can have real money behind it.
Yeah, especially these days. I feel like horror is having a resurgence, especially with the Get Outs and
once Get Out
the
got the
A24.
Oscars, it was amazing how companies that previously thought that it was lowbrow and would dismiss it suddenly all wanted to do social commentary horror, and that's where I realized my sweet spot was. I could tell stories that mattered and use surrealism and have that be under the umbrella of social commentary horror, but they were still really art films with great characters, and that was what I wanted to do. And this last year, I directed a feature starring Oscar nominee Bruce Dern and Stephen Lang, who stars in the Don't Breathe franchise and Avatar. And it just got picked up by Lionsgate this month and will be my first movie that's going to theaters and doing the whole big fancy
Congratulations.
So June 14th in select theaters and streaming and all the things. So it became this strange uphill thing of like pitching TV and trying to sell things and then finding that there's just ample opportunity as a director in horror, and now I have 3 more movies that I'm attached to direct, and as an actor you can cast yourself, which I really recommend. I'm getting to play like a wonderful supporting role in each project.
Okay.
And yes, your big roles are going to go to names because that's where your funding comes from, but you're getting more screen time each time. And you can sort of balance doing, all the things.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
At what point in this career path did you actually start getting to do this full time? Like when did you get to?
Well, after I made Ovum and sold all my eggs to fund that movie, I realized I needed a more sustainable model. I was doing voiceover at that point as an actor, making a little money that way. I'm Canadian, so I was on a visa that meant that I could only work with an entertainment, which was very, very challenging.
Got it.
So I think because of that, I had to, in order to stay in the country, find ways to work under the entertainment umbrella. And then director for hire stuff was a game changer because people really pay directors well when you get onto like bigger feature level, right? And no one talked about it. I didn't know that I would be making 2 to 5% of the budget. Each budget's getting bigger. You're making a living doing it.
That's amazing.
So, and then I was still auditioning, but suddenly I was able to be considered for bigger roles because I was in a movie with bigger actors. So it's like all of the things were kind of working out together, but it was never the way that I imagined it would go.
Sure. But, a good case study for, hey, go with the flow.
Yes, say yes to every opportunity as long as it isn't morally repugnant. There were projects I did turn down that would pay well because I felt like the depictions of there were some really problematic issues, but largely the scripts I was getting were good enough, and you can fight as a director to elevate those scripts and work with the writer and get to do a director's pass. And people largely just want to make good work, and if you can collaborate and you're open to it and you're not disparaging of their work,
Sure.
people are largely open.
Do you feel like your background and the kind of works that you made influenced the kind of scripts that you were getting sent?
Yes, I have always known exactly the kind of work, like when I was growing up watching those Virgin Suicides and My Summer of Love, I wanted to tell dark, provocative, and cerebral stories, and I wanted them to pass the Bechdel test, and I wanted to be doing stuff that was diverse and queer and visually gorgeous. And I felt like the more I became the one thing, I became the go-to girl when people wanted like a feminist,
Sure.
sexy, dark, disturbing, weird-ass project.
Your brand
Like
preceded
the
you.
more that you can be one thing, like I know many friends that were writing to try to sell spec scripts where they're like writing based off of trends of what they see in the marketplace. I never do that. I write the thing that I'm most fucking excited about because it's the only way that I'm going to be with it for years and be that, and trends change. You might not sell your script that year, and doing something over the long game that you care about, I think it's the only way that I can stick in it and keep hustling.
That's a great piece of advice. And then I think, Root Letter.
Oh yeah, and then I also shot a movie a year and a half ago in Louisiana. It was my first director for hire movie, and I got to fly down there and live in the South for 3 months and make this movie. And now it's in the process of getting a deal and will be coming out in September. So I went from having no work out there to this year. Doomsday dropped on demand on March 1st. Mid-Century will come out June 15th, and now I have my other feature coming out in the fall. So it went from being like, everyone's like, is Sonja working? Her movies aren't coming out, to now finally everything's coming out and you can see my movies.
Amazing. And then I think we have some,
And this is Mid-Century, the one that I mentioned. And this was an actress who I'd cast for the one who got me who referred me to that manager. Ellen Toland is wonderful. And I've been putting her in everything. She's the first 10 minutes of my movie and gets to do like the Drew Barrymore like dramatic death that you don't expect is going to happen. Spoilers. Yes.
Amazing. And so were both of those, this was not the work for director for hire. The other one was?
Both director for hire. I
Okay.
did back-to-back director for hire while I'm shopping my own Eternal Sunshiny script that
Sure.
I really care about. And that one, I will probably use the money I'm making from director for hire to make projects that really matter to me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So when you're directing for hire, how are you finding ways to kind of like insert yourself in your own sensibilities without kind of stepping on the authorial intent?
It's amazing that if you are authentic in your pitch and really say what it is that you're excited about within that movie, you can really lean into that and get to do more of that.
Okay.
And I found that largely people are sincere, and when they hire me, because there are things I pitch on that I'm not going to be the right fit. Like I can't do a dreamy, girly, weird version of a Lifetime movie. Like that's not going to be a fit.
Sure.
But the things that I'm going out for, I have found that I've been able to really help to tweak the script. Now it's not perfect. Like I still, my own scripts, I'm always going to have a deeper connection to, largely,
Sure.
Though there's this one script that was written by an Icelandic Jamaican queer artist that is insanely brilliant, and that's something that I can't wait to direct. But largely, the things that I write on my own, they're your babies. Like you have a different feeling for it, but that doesn't mean you can't come in to do another person's cool script and elevate it through your objectivity. Like I think because I'm not that writer and I'm passionate about it, that I just love working with writers. Like it's become something where it's a really exciting part of what I get to do each day.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think we have some, so the inspo to screen. So
Yes.
these are,
I just pulled a few stills from, I didn't realize until after I had shot these how pivotal the Virgin Suicides had been to my to other projects, because these are kind of, I was like, oh God, like, so Virgin Suicides and my project Doomsday. Like, it was like I was subliminally, so much of the blocking of this movie just ended up making it into everything that I was doing, and just the desaturated candy tones, and yeah. And yep, just, that's that same actress, Ellen Toland. Put her in everything. Yeah. So, yeah, I just kept on playing with the things that I really cared about, and I don't know. It's sometimes nice when it feels like people are finally responding to the thing that you've been excited about for years. Because I felt like the weirdo in high school that was writing strange plays that were self-indulgent that no one wanted to read, and to get to do that now and have a career doing it is something that I'm very grateful.
Glad to hear that. And then upcoming work.
Yep.
I think
just wanted to show a little trailer for my Doomsday show.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and share the trailer. It's under a minute, so if any of you are agents, this should be plenty for you. And then we'll go ahead and open up to questions. So real quick.
When I said this was a yoga retreat, I was sort of not telling the truth.
You are helping them. You are saving them. Repeat after me. We are not doing anything wrong.
We are not doing anything wrong.
What do? We kill her.
Presentation again, just have a backdrop. All right, are there any questions for Sonja? In the back.
I got one. Working with budgets, something from a higher budget, something with a lower budget. You want to keep the quality, you want to obviously keep your actors, you want to keep your crews. What do you find is easiest to work with? More money? People always say more money, more problems, but at the same time, you know,
I think
you gotta make it work.
Yeah, in terms of budget, I would say that it's for me a lot harder to make something in the $1 to $3 million range than it is to make something for 500,000 or less, because you suddenly are having to deal with enough unions and enough other just things that making my day when I'm running to get like a shot at dusk and I have to do last looks of multiple department heads, and like you're just trying to, your scripty's like, you know, frantic, and you're just trying to do the same art film style that you were making when you're doing something for no money. It's really hard, you know. You're having to, you know, honor turnaround, and no one wants our crews to be overworked like they are, and there's so many reasons that you have to, you know, like structure your days and the where money goes. But I find it's a really, really challenging spot to work because your money is just not largely going on screen. So that's why sometimes I say screw it and go and make shorts while my agents are like, no, you were past that. I just want to make art. And there were times that the limitations of a bigger budget is really hard.
The irony, the limitations of a higher budget.
I know, and it's wild because that was all I wanted before. Now there are great things too, like I can afford actors that I grew up obsessing over, and that is a wonderful thing, and I can pay my DP more, and these are people that like deserve all the money, but rarely does the money, it never seems allocated correctly, and I always think like, why isn't it going to the people, and why is it going to locations? And
how much control do you have over that?
Very little. When I'm on somebody else's project, like I feel like I'm always fighting for people to get more money, and it's never the case, and I don't have control over that. So
it's too bad. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Yeah. I am a reluctant writer. Like I like deadlines. I like to. Sorry.
You want a second to
yes,
take a
I just
drink?
need a second of water, and then.
All right. So as Sonja takes a break, something that I
it's okay.
something that I looked up before this, just some stats about queer women in general in film that might surprise you or may not. So in 2019, of the top 100 movies that Hollywood put out that year, 80% of queer on-screen characters were men. So 80% of the queer characters that were there at all were men. Only 10 speaking characters that year were lesbians. And the women protagonists, which I thought was interesting, are most likely to be seen in horror movies. 26% of women protagonists from all of the top 100 films were in horror films. So horror has a higher likelihood of having a woman protagonist.
That makes me happy. I mean, it makes me proud that at least that the genre that I tend to work in isn't as problematic.
Yeah, and then probably for a lot of the reasons that you've been talking about today.
Yeah, that's true.
So your writing process.
Yes. So for me, I like to sort of force myself into meeting deadlines. Like, I'm somebody that if I know that the Nichols Fellowship deadline or the Sundance Labs or something is coming up, external deadlines are something that just sort of forces me to actually write and get those pages done, because I like to personally write deeply uncomfortable stories that are very, very, very intimate. And sometimes I feel like the purging of ideas is like, for me, of the acting, writing, and directing, writing is the most uncomfortable and also maybe the most rewarding. But it's something that is just, I always feel like when I started to go out for writing for hire jobs, I found that I didn't enjoy the process of getting notes that derailed whatever it is that I felt was making my story authentic. And I was like, oh, and it became a thing that I opted out of doing writing for hire, and I like directing for hire better, and I like to write my own projects and get notes from collaborators that I believe in that are trying to tell the same stories as me. But studio notes, if you're trying to tell stories that are actually personal, I think can really derail. Like, there's a reason that whenever you see a movie that has like 4 or 5 writers, you're like, oh God, no one's vision was honored here.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, no, that
So,
makes sense.
yeah.
Other questions?
Hi.
Hey, you said this was originally a 60-minute pilot.
Yes.
So then, creatively, I'm so curious, as you were cutting it to 8 to 15
Yeah.
to 30, like, you thought about that?
Yes, so I never tried to do the thing like if you're making a 20-minute short and you're trying to tell that whole story suddenly in a condensed version. I decided I would treat it like it's just going to end at a different point. Like, yes, I'm condensing things, but I'm finding like something where it can still end on a dramatic moment. I'm just finding an earlier dramatic moment, because I was writing it all originally like it was 8-hour-long episodes in a limited series. That was how I foresaw it. And then when festivals wanted like a mini version, I'm just doing like, I'll shorten the beats in the first part so the pacing's moving quicker, but I'm never trying to tell the whole story in a short amount of time. It's more just picking and choosing the moments that could be a standalone episode within it. Because otherwise I think you're just weakening your concept and not doing your story any sort of like great service.
So is it kind of like taking out like BC plots so that you can emphasize?
Yes, and I think I was writing it all along. Like, there was a while that everyone was greenlighting 10 by 10s and people wanted their 10-minute things. So I was having like cliffhangers at every 10 minutes anyway, because I was writing it like that.
Sure.
So I knew when I was cutting it down. I was cutting in my head already, even though, I'm not the editor, but I've sat in enough editing sessions that you get an idea of how it can work in other forms. But I think I'm started to write that way too. Like, I just know that I'm probably not going to have it in the long form version in every market.
Sure.
So
That's smart.
you get strategic.
Cool.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I'm just wondering about, you said when you spoke about contracts and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, I'm curious about where you started to make the definitions between giving somebody, when you start in that more indie circuit,
Yes.
creator versus writer versus director, and you're saying in particular that those have like much bigger implications than
Yes.
sale.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, I'm in a similar boat, I'm from Australia, working in Canada, trying to sell in the US.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So it's, and I found that we had people who were called creators on one thing, and now I'm running into that same problem. What definition were you using, under which guild, under which, what's your advice?
Yes. For me, when it comes to credits, the Writers Guild version of creator is you have the initial concept and then you fully write it, right? Like, some people are idea people, and it can get murky if somebody does, it gets a writer for hire or a ghostwriter situation. Then I have heard of people that have slipped through who haven't done the work. But for what I was dealing with, I had given somebody, a lot of the festivals were listing creator only and they weren't listing directors. And to be charitable, I wanted other names listed, so I listed somebody as a co-creator who had never written anything. And then suddenly we get an offer for the show, and they wanted to staff us in the writer's room as well, and this other person wasn't a writer. Talented director, talented artist in many other ways. So it becomes, who owns that IP, who came up with that idea, who wrote that deck, who wrote that pilot, becomes really crucial. And you can't really throw around that creator title if that person isn't the writer who came up with that concept and then wrote it. So I think it's really important that you think of it that way. Unfortunately, whoever directed your pilot, it largely doesn't mean all that much when you're trying to sell your show. TV is a writer's medium, unlike film, where film, it's whoever directed it, they get the name in the program and no one cares about the writer. TV's entirely writer first. So if you wrote it, you own it. And having that written down is really important. And the people that put in money and might be your EPs, it's tough when you're trying to sell it because suddenly that network is going to be your EP. They might not even give the creator that EP credit. And you can be in a dangerous spot if you haven't figured it all down and written it out. Like, I really recommend an entertainment lawyer because I had deal memos and I thought they were pretty solid. But now that I have a real lawyer, there's holes in everything that I had done before. And it's worth doing that. And you can do percentage deals. Like, my lawyer makes 5% of everything I make, and that was really great for me because I couldn't afford retainers in the beginning, and I couldn't, so you can sometimes negotiate.
There are also free like arts
Volunteer
entertainment.
lawyer for the arts. Yep.
Yeah. There's organizations like that. Also, all of the like SAG, the WGA, all of the unions have like representatives who are happy to talk to you. It might take a
Yes.
while to get them on the phone, but they want you to go by their
And free consultations with a lot of
Yeah.
legit lawyers. I've been able to get advice that way in my early career.
Yeah. And then just ahead of that, before you actually wade into that mess, having some kind of contract that like states like ultimate rights come back to insert person here. We will deal with the, credits as they come. But like I find it important, especially if you're looking to sell a project eventually or sell a concept or get hired off of it, to just be really clear in the initial phases of like, who is the ultimate decision maker? Like,
Yes.
who can derail this project? It should be maybe 2 to 3 people. No one else should, like, ultimately they should be releasing the work that they do for hire for you for later things. You can do your best by them. Hopefully they trust that you will, but you do need to have it in writing that like, I'm in charge, everyone else sit down.
And when you sign with the big agencies, like WME wasn't interested in working with the other people that I had been working with, right? They were interested in my projects alone. So that became a challenging thing of not everyone moves forward, and it doesn't always feel fair, but if you've written it, it's your project. And remembering that and knowing your value.
Thank you.
Of course.
100%. Other questions?
Hi.
Hi. You've made a pilot, you've made a short and feature. What do you see as different benefits to, if you have some money and you have some time, creating a pilot versus a short film? Because it sounds like you're both in the indie film and TV space.
Yeah. I've never gotten as much benefit as the pilot. The pilot really changed my life. It's kind of amazing how if you make a solid long-form pilot, people will still take that seriously. Like, I was able to get meetings with all of the TV networks because they were sort of like, who is this person with chutzpah that actually bothered to make an hour-long dramatic pilot? So I think that if you can do something a little outside of the box like that, it really pays off. Now, the downside of it is largely you're pitching your TV pilot that you've already made, and they're like, wow, that's amazing. Do you have, like, that's your proof of concept that gets you in the door? And then largely they're like, okay, do you have an idea that you haven't made, and that's the thing that they might be interested in buying? So a lot of people think they made their beautiful pilot and they hope that will sell as is, and that's largely not the case. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule, but I think that making a solid pilot that shows what you want to do, but it also depends. Like, my long-term goal is to be the creator of a prestiged like drama on HBO, right? So I'm making TV because I really love that. Movies, I want to make great movies too, but like TV and HBO specifically has been like the goal. So figuring out where you want to go and reverse engineering how to get there, I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah, I've often heard that whenever you go into a pitch, always have at least 2 to 3 other ideas
Yes.
locked and loaded.
Yes, but never have too many, because I've also had them be like, what else do you have? What else do you have? And then they don't remember anything.
Sure.
So I'll push 2 to 3 ideas, like you said, and then I'll have a deck ready, a very visual pitch deck to send afterward, because no one still wants to read your script. And for pilot pitching, they largely want to commission you and pay you to make that script, so that script you already have is often moot. Yeah.
Good to know.
Other than as a writing sample or to get staffed.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any final? Yeah.
You, something I really admired about you is you've got your ear in pulse on so many things, at least it feels like.
Thank you.
How do you continue to absorb and be so attuned to what's happening perhaps in the industry? Is it really stuff moving you?
Everyone I meet, I try to do a Google alert on them. So I'm really, when I'm following up with them again, I'm not making it entirely self-serving. I'm congratulating that casting director on her Artios nomination, or I'm, congratulating an exec on a project that moved forward. So I think I have like a very genuine curiosity that I am excited to see where someone goes next, and I like watching people's traction. And then I'm specific about the things that I'm following. Like I know the HBO and shows, and I know like every A24 or Neon film, but it's picking the parts of the industry that you're genuinely excited about. And I know most of the goings on within festival world, but like I don't watch Marvel movies, and there are times that gets brought up in a meeting and I have to fib a little bit, but it's like finding the things that you're obsessed with and then being an expert on those areas as opposed to trying to know everything. So yeah. Yes, like as an actor, writer, and director in a specific niche market, I know that landscape. And I'm just really focused on the things that I do. And I know that there's a lot that I don't know in other areas.
Google Alert's a good piece of advice. I feel like so many people forget that like a huge part of maintaining a community is just maintenance.
Yes.
Is following up with people, is when you get a business card at a festival, don't just throw it away when you get home. Like write down what festival you met that person at.
Yes.
Immediately add them to a spreadsheet, add notes on like, we had a lovely conversation about feature films, or whatever it was. That way that when you do need to reach out to them for some reason, follow up, you have like, you remind yourself where you met them. They're not just a name. And
social media is both gross and very effective. Like I'll say that I have always been consistent about posting my wins on social media. And I had agents that reached out from the big agencies because they saw what I was doing on social media. So putting trailers out there, that was how I got the first amount of money for my first feature. I made a good trailer. And I had a financier that reached out to put money in. So sharing that work online and finding people that you're excited about their work and congratulating them on what they're doing, like community building, has been like a huge part of, like, I think me getting somewhere.
And I think that ending on community building is a great place to put it. So thank you so much, Sonja, for being here. All right, now go watch Doomsday, everybody. Thanks so much.